A billionaire ordered him removed from first class because of the way he looked. His daughter was shaking beside him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. Because men like Logan Cross don't need to prove anything until the truth does it for them. What happened next silenced an entire cabin. If you've ever been judged before anyone knew your name, this story is for you. Hit like, follow along, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every word matters. The gate agent's voice was cheerful when she scanned his boarding pass, the kind of professional warmth that came with training rather than feeling. Welcome aboard, Mr. Cross. Seat 2A. Have a wonderful flight. Logan nodded once and stepped through the jetway, his left hand carrying a single worn duffel bag and his right holding Sophie's hand. She was 8 years old and small for her age, which people had been commenting on her entire life as though she hadn't heard it before, as though she couldn't do the math herself. She wore a pale blue hoodie that was a size too big. Logan's fault. He'd ordered it online without checking the sizing. And her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that had started neat at 6 that morning and was now winning a slow argument with gravity. "Is it a big plane?" she asked. "Big enough." "How many seats?" 160 maybe. I didn't count." "You should count," she said seriously. "You always say know your environment." "I say a lot of things." She squeezed his hand. "You say that one a lot." He almost smiled. The plane was an Ashford Continental wide body, which Logan hadn't noticed when he booked the ticket and wouldn't have cared about if he had. What mattered was that the seat in row 2 had 6 inches more legroom than anything else on the aircraft, and that the seatbelt extended wide enough to accommodate the small monitoring sensor Sophie wore clipped to the waistband of her jeans, and that the position near the front meant faster deboarding in Washington, which meant less time standing in terminal corridors where Sophie's cardiologist had explicitly said she shouldn't overexert herself. He'd read the entire specification sheet for the aircraft model before buying the tickets. He'd also read the airline's medical accommodation policy, the FAA guidelines for passengers with pediatric cardiac conditions, and printed a letter from Dr. Mira Okafor at the National Children's Cardiac Center confirming Sophie's diagnosis and travel requirements. The printout was folded in the left cargo pocket of his pants, which were clean but visibly old, the knees worn pale, a small repair at the right hem where he'd caught it on something in the garage 8 months ago and sewn it back himself. He was wearing a gray Henley. His boots were scuffed. He hadn't shaved in 4 days because he'd been awake most of those 4 days handling Sophie's pre-surgical intake forms, insurance documentation, a pharmacy issue with one of her medications, and a call with the hospital's financial coordinator that had lasted 90 minutes and resolved exactly nothing. He looked like what he was, a man who had not prioritized himself in a very long time. They found their row. Sophie pressed her face against the oval window immediately, breath fogging the plastic. "It's raining on the wing," she said. "It'll clear when we climb." "How high do we go?" 35, maybe 37,000 feet. "That's almost space." "It's not close to space. It's closer than our house." He put the duffel in the overhead bin and sat down. The first-class cabin was half empty at this point, passengers still boarding, flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency in the narrow aisle. Logan watched the door. He always watched doors. Sophie had pulled a small sketchbook from her backpack and was already drawing something, probably the rain on the wing. She drew constantly. The cardiologist called it a good sign, said kids who stayed engaged with something were coping better than kids who went flat. Logan had never asked what flat looked like. He didn't want to know. The forward boarding door was still open when he heard it. Heels on the jetway, more than one pair, moving fast and with the kind of rhythm that expected people to move out of the way. Victoria Ashford walked onto the plane like she'd built it. Technically, her father had. Ashford Continental was the family business, inherited and expanded by the time Victoria was 26. And at 30, she ran it with the particular intensity of someone who needed everyone to know she'd earned what she'd inherited. She was dressed in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than Logan's truck, her dark hair pulled back at the base of her neck, 2 phones in her left hand, and an expression that said she had been inconvenienced by simply being here. Behind her came 4 members of what appeared to be an executive team. Younger people, sharp clothes, laptops already out before they'd found their seats, the polished efficiency of people who billed their time in 15-minute increments and never forgot it. And behind them, two men in dark blazers who were not airline staff. Logan clocked them immediately. Private security. The one on the left was former law enforcement. Something in the way he stood, weight slightly back, eyes working the room in a pattern. The one on the right was younger and trying too hard, chin up, shoulders squared, performing the job rather than doing it. Victoria reached row 1, glanced at her phone, and then glanced at Logan. The glance lasted a half second. He saw her take in the boots, the Henley, the duffel already in the overhead. Something shifted in her expression. Not hostility yet, more like the mild confusion of encountering something that didn't compute. She turned to the flight attendant nearest the galley, a woman in her 40s named Patricia, according to her name tag. "There's been a seating error," Victoria said. "I need rows 1 through 4 for my delegation. Please have the passengers in those rows moved to business class." Patricia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes did something more careful. "Ms. Ashford, seats in rows 1 through 4 are assigned by ticket. I'd need to check with—" "I'm not asking you to check. I'm telling you there's been an error." Sophie had stopped drawing. Logan noticed that before anything else. The pencil had gone still in her hand, and she'd turned slightly from the window, the way she always did when she sensed tension. That small animal alertness she'd developed somewhere in the years of hospitals and waiting rooms and adults saying things over her head that they thought she couldn't follow. He put a hand on her knee. She looked at him. "Keep drawing," he said quietly. "Is something happening?" "Someone's having a bad morning. It's not our problem." She studied his face for a moment. She was very good at reading his face, better than most adults, and then turned back to her sketchbook. But the pencil didn't move. Patricia had stepped into the galley and was quietly using an in-cabin phone. The security man on the left, the one who knew what he was doing, had positioned himself in the aisle near row 2, not blocking it yet, just present. Logan looked at him. The man met his eyes, then looked away first. The flight's head purser appeared from the front galley within 2 minutes. His name tag read Daniel, and he had the particular composure of someone who'd handled 100 variations of this situation and knew that calm was the only available tool. "Ms. Ashford," Daniel said, "I've reviewed the manifest. The passengers currently seated in rows 2 through 4 hold valid first-class tickets, and one passenger has a documented medical accommodation on file. Under FAA regulations and our airline's medical transport policy, we cannot—" "I'm aware of what your policy says," Victoria said. She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if she'd been angry. "I'm also aware that this is an Ashford Continental aircraft operating under Ashford Continental protocols, which give executives traveling on company business priority seating rights when requested in advance. My team made that request." "The request was for row 1, Ms. Ashford. It was granted. The other rows are needed." She glanced back at her team, who were standing in the aisle pretending very hard to look at their phones. "I have sensitive work discussions that require private cabin space. Surely that's not difficult to accommodate." Daniel looked at Logan. Logan looked back at him with nothing on his face. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "I apologize for the disruption. I want to make sure you're aware, but Boshi, you are not required to move. Your ticket and your accommodation are both valid, and the airline will honor them." "Good," Logan said. The word was quiet. Not aggressive, not a challenge, just final. Victoria turned to look at him then, fully, for the first time. Whatever she'd expected him to say, or not say, this apparently wasn't it. "I'm sorry," she said, with the tone of someone who wasn't. "Did you want to weigh in on this?" "No. Well, because this is a company aircraft, and I'm telling you that—" "You're telling the flight attendant," Logan said. "Not me, and he's already told you what the policy is." A beat. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ray," she said. The security man on the left, Ray, moved slightly forward, not a threat, a presence. The particular physics of large men in narrow spaces. Logan didn't move. Sophie put her hand over his, on his knee. She did it without looking up from the sketchbook where she'd started drawing again. Something small and tight, a shape he couldn't identify. The 2-minute stand settled into itself. Other passengers in the forward cabin had gone very still with the particular stillness of people who want to be invisible. 3 rows back, a man in his 50s with a window seat had taken out his phone and was holding it casually at an angle that wasn't casual at all. "Your name," Victoria said to Logan. Not a question. "Cross?" "Mr. Cross." She chose the formal version deliberately. He could hear it. "I want you to understand that I'm not trying to make this unpleasant. I'm asking you to accept a voluntary seat change. You'd be in business class, which is fully comparable. My daughter's cardiologist specified these seats." He said it the same way he'd said everything. Level, unhurried, no edge to it. The seatbelt configuration, the proximity to the forward galley for medical access, the reduced walk distance at arrival. "It's in the accommodation letter I filed with the airline 3 weeks ago." He looked at Daniel. "Which your airline confirmed." "Which we confirmed," Daniel said. "Yes." Victoria looked at Sophie then. Sophie, who was 8 years old and small and had a monitoring sensor clipped to her jeans, and a braid coming undone, and a sketchbook open to a page with a half-finished drawing of rain. Something moved across Victoria's face. It lasted less than a second, and then it was gone. "There are other seats that would meet. I'm not moving her," Logan said. The cabin had gone fully quiet. Even the boarding passengers in the aisle had stopped moving. Ray was still standing there. Victoria was still standing there. And Logan Cross was sitting in seat 2A with his daughter's hand over his, not going anywhere, not raising his voice, not performing anything. He was simply still. It was the stillness of someone who had held positions under much worse pressure than this. Someone who had learned that volume was a tool of the uncertain, that the truly dangerous thing in any confrontation was the person who had nothing to prove and nowhere to be moved. He didn't know if Victoria Ashford could feel that. Most civilians couldn't, not exactly, but they could sense the shape of it, the absence of give, and it tended to change the texture of their certainty. She didn't back down. Not yet. But something in the geometry of the standoff had shifted. "I'll need a moment," she said to Ray, and turned toward the forward galley. Sophie watched her go. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yeah." "Why does she want our seats?" He thought about how to answer that. "She's used to getting what she wants." Sophie considered this with the particular gravity she brought to most things. "That's not a good reason." "No," Logan said. "It's not." She turned back to the window. The rain was still moving on the wing in thin silver lines. "I finished the wing," she said, and showed him the page. He looked at it. She'd drawn it exactly right. The curve of the metal, the rivets, the rain tracking sideways in the acceleration of whatever wind moved at gate speed. She'd also drawn, in the lower corner of the page, a small figure sitting very straight in an airplane seat. He recognized the posture. "Is that supposed to be me?" "You always sit like that," she said, "like you're waiting for something." He handed the sketchbook back. "Habit." "From the Navy?" "From a lot of things." She nodded, accepting this, and turned back to the window. In the forward galley, he could hear Victoria Ashford's voice, low and controlled, and Daniel's answers, patient and immovable. The man 3 rows back was still holding his phone at that angle. A woman across the aisle had stopped pretending to read her magazine. Logan sat with his daughter in the seat the airline had assigned them, in the row her doctor had specified, on the flight that would take her to the hospital in Washington, where a surgical team was going to spend 6 hours trying to fix the thing in her chest that had been wrong since she was born. He was not going to move. He'd learned in a lot of worse places than this that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply refuse to be moved, quietly, without anger, without theater, and make the other person decide who they wanted to be. He didn't know yet who Victoria Ashford was going to decide to be. He'd find out. Sophie leaned her head against his arm. Not because she was scared, he thought, just because it was there. Outside, the rain tracked its silver lines across the wing, and the gate agent's voice came over the intercom announcing final boarding, and somewhere in the forward galley a conversation was still happening that would not end the way the person having it expected. Logan closed his eyes for a moment. Know your environment, he already did. Daniel came back from the galley with the particular expression of someone who had done everything right and was about to be punished for it anyway. He stopped at row 2, kept his voice low, addressed Logan directly. "Mr. Cross, I want to be transparent with you. Ms. Ashford is requesting that the captain make a determination before we push back. That means there may be a short delay." He paused. "I want you to know that my recommendation to the captain will be to honor your accommodation, but I'm not the final authority here." "I understand," Logan said. "Is there anything I can get for you or your daughter in the meantime?" Sophie looked up from her sketchbook. "Do you have apple juice?" Daniel almost smiled. "We do." "The kind in the little cans or the kind in the box?" "Cans." She weighed this seriously. "Okay, yes, please." Daniel moved back toward the galley. Logan watched him go, then checked the time on his phone. They were supposed to push back in 11 minutes. Sophie's hospital intake appointment was at 3:15. He'd built in 2 hours of buffer, which had seemed like enough when he'd planned it, and now felt like it was being quietly spent on something it was never meant for. He didn't say any of that. Sophie would hear the math in his voice if he let it get there. She was already back to drawing. This time, from what he could see at the angle, she was sketching the seats across the aisle, the curve of the headrests, the fold of the tray table latched up. She drew what was in front of her. Always had. Her second-grade teacher had called it a gift. Logan called it coping, and didn't say that out loud either. Victoria Ashford reappeared from the galley. She didn't look at Logan. She went to her seat in row 1, said something brief to the man sitting to her right, late 40s, silver at the temples, the kind of careful posture that said senior VP or general counsel, and he handed her a tablet. She read something on it, scrolled, read more. Ray, the security man, had taken up a position just ahead of row 2 in the aisle, which was technically not blocking Logan, and technically not blocking him. The second security man, the younger one, was standing near the forward bulkhead with his arms behind his back, trying to look official and mostly looking like he'd wandered in from somewhere else. The boarding door was still open. 2 more passengers came through, a couple in their 60s who took one look at the tension hanging in the forward cabin and immediately became very interested in their carry-on luggage. Logan looked around the cabin. The man 3 rows back, gray suit, window seat, the one who'd been holding his phone at that angle, had not put it down. In the aisle seat of row 4, a woman in her late 30s with reading glasses pushed up on her head had given up any pretense of her magazine and was watching the forward rows with the focused attention of someone who'd decided this mattered. Across from her, a younger man in a hoodie had his phone out openly now, recording. Logan had not asked any of them for anything. He never had been good at that. The apple juice appeared. Daniel set it on Sophie's tray table, the little silver can, a plastic cup with ice alongside it. Sophie poured it herself, carefully, tongue between her teeth the way she did when she was concentrating. "Thank you," she told Daniel, with the particular formality she used with adults she'd decided deserved it. "Of course." Daniel lingered a half-second. Then, quietly, to Logan, "Captain's been notified. He's finishing pre-flight checks." Logan nodded. Daniel moved off. Sophie drank her juice and drew her headrests, and the window light fell across the sketchbook page in a way that made the pencil lines look warmer than they were. Then Victoria Ashford stood up again. Logan had thought she was settling in. He'd been wrong. She walked back to row 2, stopped in the aisle. Ray moved with her automatically, half a step behind. She looked at Logan with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not contempt exactly, more like the look of someone who had made a decision they weren't entirely comfortable with, but had made it anyway. "Mr. Cross," she said, "I've just confirmed with our operations team that business class on this flight has been reconfigured to match first-class seat specifications. The seatbelt extension your daughter requires is available in seat 6A, and the deboarding sequence can be adjusted to allow front-of-line exit from the business cabin." She said all of this with the careful precision of someone who had prepped it. "I want to be clear that we're committed to meeting your daughter's medical needs. This isn't about that." "Then what is it about?" Logan asked. She blinked. She'd prepared for resistance. He could see that, but she'd prepared for the kind with more words in it. "I have confidential executive discussions that require—" "You said that already." A short silence. Sophie had stopped pouring. "Mr. Cross, my daughter has a ventricular septal defect," Logan said. Not loud. Not for the cabin, though the cabin could hear it anyway. She's been managing it since she was 4 days old. The surgery she's flying to Washington for has been scheduled for 8 months. The accommodation I filed with your airline specified these seats because her cardiologist, not me, her cardiologist, determined that proximity to the forward galley provides faster access to supplemental oxygen and AED equipment if she has a cardiac event during the flight. He stopped. Let that land. I'm not moving her closer to the back of the plane because your team needs to talk about something they can't say in front of strangers. Across the aisle, the woman with the reading glasses had taken them off her head and set them in her lap. Victoria's jaw was tight. The medical team at our partner facility can confirm. I'm not asking your partner facility, Logan said. I'm telling you what Dr. Okafor told me, in writing, which I have. He didn't reach for the cargo pocket. He didn't need to prove it. He'd already told Daniel about it, and Daniel had already confirmed it. The letter existed whether Victoria Ashford believed in it or not. She looked at Sophie then, the same way she had before. That same flicker, something that moved across her face too fast to name. Sophie was looking back at her with the steady brown eyes she'd inherited from her mother, the ones that didn't flinch from things. What's wrong with your heart? Victoria asked. It came out differently than anything else she'd said, less prepared. Sophie considered her. There's a hole in it. There's been a hole since I was born. They're going to fix it. Are you scared? Sophie thought about this with genuine seriousness. A little, but Dad says being scared doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means something matters. Victoria looked at Logan. Logan looked back at her and said nothing because he'd said everything, and the rest was just noise. Ray shifted his weight slightly in the aisle. The younger security man was looking at the floor. I need you to move, Victoria said. Not to Logan this time, to Ray. He looked at her. Step back, she said. Give them space. Ray stepped back. She stood there another moment, and Logan watched her decide something. He could see it happen, the particular internal negotiation of a person who'd been running on one set of assumptions and had just found them insufficient. He didn't know yet what she was deciding. People surprised him sometimes. She went back to row 1 without saying anything else. The boarding door finally closed, the lock engaged with a sound like a word ending. The cabin began the slow pressurized settling of a plane preparing to become somewhere else. Flight attendants moved through their safety checks. The younger security man found a jump seat and stopped trying to look important. Ray sat down in the one empty seat in row 3, which someone had apparently vacated during the commotion, and stared straight ahead. Sophie finished her juice. She pressed her palm flat against the window and watched the tarmac crew moving in the rain below. Dad, yeah. Are they still going to try to make us move? I don't think so. But you don't know. No, he said. I don't know. She nodded. This was something she'd learned to accept. Not knowing, the waiting, the space between a question and its answer. The hospital had taught her that, the years of monitoring and follow-up and sitting in rooms while adults talked in the hallway. She was better at uncertainty than most adults Logan knew. He both admired that and hated that she'd had to learn it. He'd learned it too, in different rooms, in different kinds of waiting. The wait before a mission briefing. The wait after a mission when you were counting who came back. The wait at a hospital in Ohio when the doctor came out of a room and Logan knew from the man's face before he opened his mouth that the rest of Logan's life was going to be different than the first part. He'd been good at that kind of waiting. He wasn't always sure if that was strength or just numbness wearing a useful mask. The plane began to move. Sophie pressed closer to the window. We're moving. We're moving. We didn't get kicked off. No, he said. We didn't. She smiled at the window, private, just for herself. He let her have it. The pushback was slow and ordinary, the plane easing back from the gate with the lumbering dignity of something too large to hurry. The rain was letting up. Logan could see it in the way the water on the wing changed from tracking lines to scattered drops. He let himself exhale, once, quietly. The problem with discipline was that it cost something, even when you did it right. Especially when you did it right. He'd held still in that aisle confrontation the same way he'd held still in places that actually mattered, drawing on the same reservoir, and the reservoir was not bottomless. He'd learned that late, or maybe he'd always known and chosen to ignore it. The way the stillness always had a price, paid later, in the dark, in the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. He was tired now. Not dramatically, just the low, persistent kind that had been there for months. He thought about Washington, about the hospital, the intake forms he still needed to submit one final document to, the parking situation at the medical center that he'd researched and found was a problem that required either a shuttle or a very long walk, and Sophie couldn't do a very long walk right now, not reliably. He thought about the hotel he'd booked 4 blocks away, which had a microwave in the room so he could make the specific kind of oatmeal Sophie would eat in the mornings without complaint. He thought about all the ordinary logistics of keeping a small person safe and moving forward in the world, the 10,000 invisible tasks that accumulated in the absence of anyone else to share them. He did not think about Claire. He was good at that too. Or he'd gotten good at it. There was a difference. The plane reached the runway, and the engines changed pitch. That low building hum that had always, in every aircraft he'd ever been in, produced the same sensation in his chest, something that was not quite anticipation and not quite dread, but lived between them. Sophie put her hand in his without looking away from the window. He held it. The acceleration came. The runway moved under them faster and faster, and then stopped moving because they were moving instead, climbing, the rain-gray tarmac dropping away below, and the clouds coming up to meet them. And for a moment everything was gray and close, and then they were through it and above it, and the sun was there, flat and winter-pale, above a white floor of cloud that extended to every horizon. "There it is," Sophie said. "There it is. It always looks the same up here." "That's kind of the point." She leaned back in her seat, still holding his hand, and looked at the sky with the expression she sometimes got that made her seem older than 8 and younger than 8 at the same time. The face of someone who understood that the world was both larger and smaller than it appeared, and had decided that was all right. In row 1, Victoria Ashford was on one of her phones talking in a low, controlled voice about something that was not Logan Cross or Sophie or the argument she'd just failed to win. The silver-templed man beside her was typing. Her other 2 team members were doing the things executive teams did at 37,000 feet, reading, editing, performing productivity. Everything looked normal from the back. Logan knew better than to trust how things looked. He watched the door to the cockpit, the small details of the cabin, the way Patricia, the flight attendant, moved through her routine with the focused competence of someone good at her job. He watched Ray in row 3, who had his eyes closed now, or appeared to. He watched the man in the gray suit in row 5, the one with the phone, who had finally put it away but was looking at the seatbacks in front of him with the fixed attention of someone reviewing footage in his head. Nothing happened for 40 minutes. Sophie drew. She ate the small package of almonds that appeared with the drink service, ate them one at a time with the methodical patience she applied to most things she genuinely liked. She asked Logan if clouds felt like anything if you put your hand through them, and he said it felt like cold and wet and nothing, like walking through fog, and she said that was disappointing, and he agreed with her. He was watching the seatbelt sensor on her monitor. He did this constantly, the way he might have watched a perimeter, regular checks, intervals, not dwelling. The numbers were where they should be. Her color was good. She hadn't mentioned her chest. 43 minutes in, she put the sketchbook down. "I'm tired," she said. "You can sleep. What if I miss something? I'll be here." She looked at him with that old soul skepticism she'd developed somewhere around age 6. "You'll wake me up if something happens?" "Define something. Anything interesting." "I'll wake you up," he said. She didn't believe him. He could tell. She fell asleep anyway, the way exhausted children do. Quickly, completely, her head finding the angle against his shoulder that she'd been finding since she was small enough to hold. He sat very still so she wouldn't slip. The cabin settled into its cruising quiet. The white noise of altitude, the occasional soft exchange between flight attendants, the distant percussion of a laptop keyboard. Someone a few rows back had fallen asleep and was breathing audibly. Someone else was watching something on a tablet with the volume low enough that Logan could only catch fragments, the tinny audio of a world trying to exist in miniature. He kept his eyes forward. He was aware of Patricia, the flight attendant, moving through the cabin with the drink cart about 20 minutes later, aware that she paused at his row, looked at Sophie sleeping, and continued without offering anything because she'd read the situation correctly. He appreciated that. He'd spent enough time around people who couldn't read a situation to genuinely value the ones who could. He did not hear Victoria Ashford get up. He heard the moment she was beside him, which was different. He had a specific sensitivity to proximity that had never fully switched off, the kind that registers a presence before the eyes confirm it. He looked up. She was standing in the aisle, holding her own drink, a glass of something clear. She wasn't in full command mode now. Something about the altitude or the time or Sophie's sleeping had changed the architecture of her posture slightly. The shoulders less squared, the jaw less set. She looked at Sophie for a moment, then at Logan. "I owe you an apology," she said, low enough not to wake Sophie. He waited. "What I did at the gate was wrong," she said. I wasn't thinking about why you were in those seats. I was thinking about my meeting, which isn't an excuse." Logan said nothing. She seemed to have expected that too. "I looked up the accommodation filing, the one you submitted." She paused. "I saw her diagnosis." "You didn't need to look it up," Logan said. "I told you." "I know." A beat. "I didn't believe you. I believed that you believed it. I just thought—" She stopped, took a breath. "I thought you were the kind of person who exaggerates a situation to get what he wants. And now? Now I think I was looking for a reason to not see you." She said it like she'd been working up to it. "The way you were dressed, the bag. I made a decision before you said a word, and then I just kept making it, even when it stopped making sense." Logan looked at her for a long moment. Sophie shifted slightly against his shoulder, resettled, her breathing unchanged. "I appreciate that," he said finally. "But?" "No but. He meant it. I just appreciate it." She nodded slowly. She looked like she'd expected more anger, more accusation, something she could push back against. People who'd done something wrong often wanted the aftermath to be more dramatic than it was. It made the guilt feel proportionate. "Your daughter," she said. "The surgery. Is it—" She seemed to realize mid-sentence that she was asking for something she hadn't earned. "I'm sorry. You don't have to answer that." "They're optimistic," he said. "Good surgical team. She's been waiting a long time for this." "How long?" 8 months for the procedure date. Her whole life for the possibility of it." Something crossed Victoria's face. Not pity. He would have put his defenses up immediately for pity. Something more complicated and more honest. "She seems like a remarkable kid," she said. "She is," Logan said, simply, without modifier. Victoria stood there a moment longer as though deciding something, and then she returned to row 1 without fanfare, without the performance of having made amends. She just sat down and picked up her phone and kept going. Logan watched her go. He wasn't sure what to make of her. Most people, once they'd apologized, wanted you to make it easier for them. Wanted forgiveness dispensed quickly, the ledger balanced, the discomfort resolved. She hadn't asked for that. Whether that was integrity or just a different kind of pride, he genuinely didn't know. He filed it away. In the back of the cabin, somewhere around row 12, a baby had woken up and was crying the specific cry of a small person who had fallen asleep somewhere comfortable and awoken somewhere else. The sound rose and fell and eventually quieted. Cruising altitude settled into its rhythms. Sophie's monitor read steady numbers. Logan Cross sat in seat 2A, with his daughter's weight against his arm and the winter sun coming flat through the window at an angle that didn't hit his eyes, and thought about Washington. About the lobby of the cardiac center, which he'd studied in photographs because he always studied a place before he had to navigate it with Sophie. About the team of 6 who would spend 6 hours trying to close the hole in his daughter's heart. About Dr. Okafor's voice on the phone 6 weeks ago, careful and precise, and genuinely optimistic in a way that didn't feel performed. He thought about what optimistic meant. Not certain. Not guaranteed. Just leaning toward the better outcome and doing everything possible to justify the lean. He could work with that. He was still sitting exactly like that, still, contained, watching, when Sophie woke up 40 minutes later and looked at the window and said, without preamble, "Are we there yet?" "Not yet." She yawned, looked at her sketchbook, looked at the seat pocket in front of her, looked at Logan. Did anything interesting happen? He thought about Victoria Ashford standing in the aisle with a glass of water and something difficult on her face. "Someone apologized," he said. Sophie processed this. "The lady from before?" "Yeah." "Huh." She reached for her sketchbook. Was it a real apology? Logan considered the question longer than Sophie probably expected him to. She was used to that. She waited. "I think so," he said. "I'm not sure yet." "How do you know if it's real?" "You watch what they do next," he said. "That's the only way to know." She opened her sketchbook to a new page. For a moment, she just looked at the blank white. "I'm going to draw the clouds," she said. "You've drawn clouds before." "These are different clouds." He looked out the window. They were the same clouds, but he understood what she meant. Different moment, different eye, different thing being looked at. The same subject and a completely different drawing. "Okay," he said. She started drawing. Logan went back to watching the cabin, the doors, the ordinary landscape of people in close quarters trying to be comfortable and mostly managing it. Patricia moved through with quiet efficiency. The man in the gray suit had taken out a book. Ray in row 3 was definitely asleep now, not performing it. From row 1 came the muffled professional rhythm of Victoria Ashford's work, the tap of a keyboard, a brief phone exchange, the low hum of someone driving very hard toward something. He didn't know what she was driving toward. He didn't need to. He had his own direction. Washington was getting closer at 500 miles per hour, and Sophie's pencil was moving across the page with the particular focus she brought to things that mattered to her. And somewhere in the forward section of the plane, a conversation was winding down that had started very badly and ended somewhere neither of them had expected. That was the thing about altitude. It changed the texture of things, compressed a space, put people in proximity they'd never have chosen on the ground, made them say things they might have spent years not saying, or apologize for things they'd spent years not seeing. Or it changed nothing, and people just sat next to each other in their separate worlds and landed in the same city, having never really arrived anywhere together. Logan Cross had been up here enough times to know that both things happened with roughly equal frequency. He looked at Sophie's drawing. The clouds were coming out right. She had a feel for negative space, always had, the way the white of the page could be the thing itself, rather than the absence of something. He settled back. The plane hummed around them at altitude, indifferent and reliable, carrying its cargo of people toward wherever they were going, and Logan Cross let himself be carried, just this once, without fighting the current. Just this once. Sophie had filled 4 pages by the time the seatbelt sign came back on. Not the descent seatbelt sign. That was still an hour out. This was something else, the kind of unscheduled illumination that made experienced travelers straighten in their seats and look at each other with the particular sideways attention of people who knew the difference between routine and not routine. The intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your purser Daniel speaking. We're going to ask everyone to return to their seats and fasten seatbelts at this time. We're not expecting significant turbulence, but the captain has requested everyone seated as a precaution. Flight attendants, please be seated as well." Patricia, who had been collecting cups 2 rows back, moved forward with efficient calm. The younger flight attendant, Logan hadn't caught his name, 20s, dark hair, the kind of deliberate composure that meant he was newer at this, secured the drink cart and took his jump seat with a speed that was practiced but slightly too fast. Sophie looked up from the sketchbook. "Is something wrong?" "Probably not," Logan said. "But maybe." Seatbelt on. She closed the sketchbook and clicked her belt with the automatic motion of someone who'd been doing it her whole life in a lot of different vehicles. Logan checked the fit, tugged it once, let it go. The monitor at her waistband read steady. Her color was fine. She wasn't holding her chest. He checked those things in that order every time. He always would. The plane continued at altitude for another 4 minutes. Normal sound, normal feel, nothing Logan's body registered as wrong. Then the cockpit door opened. He heard it before he saw it, the specific click and pressure change of that door, and looked up. The man who stepped out was in full captain's uniform, 4 stripes, the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions in small spaces under large pressure. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders with the kind of posture that didn't come from self-consciousness, silver at the temples under his cap. He spoke briefly to Daniel near the galley, voice too low to carry, and Daniel nodded and stepped back. The captain turned and looked down the cabin. His eyes moved across the rows with the systematic scan of someone checking a perimeter, and then they stopped. Row 2. Logan felt it the way you feel a scope settle on you. Not dramatic, not a sound, just a change in the weight of being looked at. He met the captain's eyes across the distance of the cabin. The captain stood very still. Then he walked forward, and as he came closer, Logan felt something he hadn't felt in years. The specific internal recalibration of being recognized by someone who wasn't supposed to be here, in a context that made no sense. The way a face from a completely separate chapter of your life could appear in the present tense and make time fold wrong for a moment. He knew this man. The name assembled itself before the face had fully resolved. Carver. James Carver. He'd been a lieutenant commander in the Naval Air Wing attached to the Joint Task Force. Not a SEAL, but one of the pilots who'd gone back in when no one was supposed to go back in, when the operation had come apart at the seams and the people left on the ground were running out of time and options. Logan had not seen James Carver in 4 years. He had not expected to see him here. Carver stopped at the edge of row 2. He looked at Logan the way a man looks at something he's thought about a long time and wasn't prepared to see in person. "Logan Cross," he said. His voice was quiet. Professional composure intact, but just barely, the way a structure looks stable from the outside right up until you can see the stress in the joints. Logan nodded once. "Captain?" Sophie looked up. She looked at the captain, then at her father, reading the frequency between them the way she always read rooms. Silently, completely, storing it. Carver's eyes moved to her. Something in his face shifted, softened in a way that wasn't performed. "This is your daughter?" "Sophie," Logan said. Carver looked at her with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. He'd known about Sophie. Logan didn't know how, the way information moved through the peripheral networks of people who'd served together, who knew people who knew people. The informal intelligence of shared history. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hi," Carver said. And then, almost to himself, "She has your eyes." "She has her mother's eyes," Logan said. Carver accepted that correction with a small nod. He looked back at Logan. "Daniel briefed me about the situation at boarding," he said. "Careful, neutral." "It's handled," Logan said. "He said there was a dispute about seats that you were asked to move. We're still in the same seats." "I know." Carver paused. His jaw worked slightly, the tell of a man choosing words. "I'm sorry it happened on my aircraft. You didn't know we were here." "No," Carver said. "I didn't." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, more like the silence between people who have been in a loud place together and know that silence is also a kind of communication. Victoria Ashford was watching from row 1. Logan saw her in his peripheral vision, her attention no longer on her phone. The silver-templed man beside her had stopped typing. Ray in row 3 had come fully awake. That quality of stillness that comes when someone trained is paying attention and trying not to show it. The man in the gray suit in row 5 had his phone out again. Carver seemed to become aware of the audience gradually, the way you become aware of a room going quiet around you. He looked at Logan with something that had moved past professional into personal, into the territory that didn't have a clean name. "Can I—" He stopped, started again. "I need to ask you something. It's going to seem like an odd question." "Ask it." "Sophie's backpack," Carver said. "Does she still have—" He seemed to realize how strange this sounded mid-sentence. "When I was told your name by Daniel, I remembered something. Someone told me years ago that that your daughter carried—" He stopped again. Logan looked at Sophie. She was already reaching for the backpack at her feet. She knew what he was thinking. She'd seen him look at the bag when someone mentioned something connected to the time before. The time she understood as existing, even if she hadn't been old enough to be in it, the stories she'd been told in pieces, the parts Logan kept, and the parts he'd let go. She unzipped the front pocket and held out the challenge coin. It was worn almost smooth in places, the edges rubbed soft by years of small hands and nervous fingers, the finish gone from the high points, the details still visible in the recessed parts. The trident and anchor on one face, the inscription on the other in letters so small you had to know what it said to read it. Logan's unit designation. A date, a latitude and longitude that wasn't on any public map. Carver looked at the coin in Sophie's palm for a long moment. Then he looked at Logan with an expression that Logan had not seen on a man's face, directed at him in a very long time. The expression that existed on the other side of a debt too large to pay, that lived in the specific territory between gratitude and something heavier and older. "We need to talk," Carver said. "We are talking," Logan said, "properly." He glanced at the cabin around them, the watching faces, the phone that was definitely recording in row 5, the absolute attention of the first-class section that was pretending not to pay absolute attention. "Not here." "Captain," Logan said carefully, "whatever you're thinking about saying—" "Logan." Carver's voice had dropped to the private register, the one that cut through everything else by not trying to. "I've thought about what I'd say to you for 4 years. I practiced it, actually, different versions. You were never there to say it to." He paused. "I'm not going to waste the fact that you're here." Sophie looked at Logan. He looked back at her. She tilted her head very slightly, the question without words that she'd been asking since she could form questions. "Is this okay?" He didn't know yet. 15 minutes, Logan said. "I'm not leaving Sophie." "I'm not asking you to." Carver looked at Patricia, who had been standing near the galley with the contained expression of a woman who had completely stopped pretending she wasn't listening. "Can we get Sophie set up with something, whatever she'd like?" "I'm fine," Sophie said, with the automatic self-sufficiency of a child who'd spent a lot of time in adult situations. "I have my sketchbook." "Do you want anything else? Snack? Movie?" She considered. "Do you have headphones that work?" "The good ones," Carver said. "In-ears." "Okay," she said. "Yes, please." Patricia disappeared toward the galley. Carver turned slightly toward the cabin, and Logan realized, with the particular social awareness that came from years of reading rooms, that the captain was about to do something deliberate, something that was going to change the temperature in here. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carver said, raising his voice to cabin volume without forcing it. The simple authority of someone who'd commanded spaces larger than this. "Thank you for your patience. The seatbelt sign will remain on for approximately 20 more minutes. We are not experiencing any mechanical issues. This is a precautionary measure due to forecast conditions ahead that we expect to bypass shortly." He paused. "I also want to take a moment while I'm out here to address something that happened earlier on this flight." The cabin went the particular kind of quiet that happens when people who have been pretending to be in their own worlds stop pretending. Victoria Ashford sat very still in row 1. "A passenger in this cabin was asked to give up his seat," Carver continued. "He declined, as was his right under federal aviation regulations and basic human decency. I want to make clear that the crew of this aircraft, my crew, handled that situation correctly, and that the passengers who held valid tickets were at no point obligated to move." He wasn't looking at Victoria. He wasn't looking at Logan either. He was looking at the middle distance, the specific place you look when you're speaking to everyone at once. I'm mentioning this not to assign blame, but because I think it matters. What happens in the 40 square feet of a first-class cabin is not separate from who we are on the ground. How we treat people when we think it won't cost us anything is exactly who we are. He stopped. The silence that followed was complete. Then he looked directly at Logan Cross, and everything in the cabin that had been ambiguous became unambiguous. "I know the passenger who was asked to move," Carver said. "I've known him for 11 years. I know what he's done, and I know what he's never asked for in return. And I want the people in this cabin to know something that he would never tell you himself." "Captain," Logan's voice was flat. "Warning. Logan. You don't need to do this." "No," Carver agreed. "I don't need to." He looked at him steadily. "But I've owed it to you for 4 years, and you've never been in a room long enough to receive it, so I'm going to say it now, while you can't walk away." A long beat. Logan said nothing. Sophie had gone very still, the headphones Patricia had brought her sitting in her lap, unopened. She was watching her father with the precise attention of someone who understood that what was about to be said was important in a way she'd been waiting to understand for a long time. Carver turned back to the cabin. 4 years ago, he said, I was the senior pilot on a joint military operation that went wrong in about 15 different ways simultaneously. Equipment failure, compromised coordinates, bad intelligence, the kind of convergence of problems that shouldn't be survivable. He said it with the flat matter-of-factness of someone who'd processed it for years and arrived at something like peace with the facts, without peace with what they cost. There were 31 personnel on the ground, including myself, when we lost our extraction. We'd been there 11 hours. We were out of options. The man in the gray suit had put his phone completely away. He was watching with his hands in his lap. A SEAL team came in on a mission that officially did not exist, because the operation itself officially did not exist, which meant no air support, no backup, no coverage. 6 men. They came in on foot under fire, and they got us out. He paused. All 31 of us. The woman with the reading glasses had pressed them against her mouth with one hand, watching. The team leader was a lieutenant commander named Logan Cross. Carver looked at him. He was 28 years old. He made decisions in that window of time that I still don't fully understand how a human being makes under that kind of pressure. He got every one of his men home. He got every one of my people home. And then he disappeared from official record because the operation was classified, because that's how it works. Because the people who do those things don't get parades. They get silence. Logan was looking at the floor. Not hiding. He didn't do that. More like giving himself somewhere to put his eyes while this happened. I tried to find him afterward, Carver said. I knew he'd left the service. I knew his wife had gotten sick. I knew he was raising his daughter alone. His voice shifted almost imperceptibly on that last sentence. Not breaking, just honest. I wanted to say thank you. I never got to. Victoria Ashford had turned fully in her seat. Her face was doing something complicated and unguarded, the expression of a person whose understanding of the previous 2 hours had just been entirely restructured. So I'm saying it now, Carver said, and turned to look directly at Logan Cross in row 2 with his daughter's hand on his arm and 4 years of unreceived acknowledgement between them. Thank you. For what you did, for how you did it, and for the fact that you never asked anyone to know about it. He paused. The people in this cabin asked the wrong man to move. He reached into his breast pocket. What he took out was a challenge coin, different from Sophie's, newer, the finish intact, the seal of the Naval Air Wing on one face, and on the other face a set of coordinates and a name, Carver. His own coin, the one a commanding officer earned and kept and gave only in the specific circumstance of honoring someone who had saved your life. He held it out to Logan. Logan looked at it for a long moment without moving. James, he said. Don't argue with me about this, Carver said. You know what this is. You know what it means. I know what it means. Then take it. Another moment. Logan reached out and took the coin. He held it in his palm for a second, then closed his fingers around it, and something in the set of his jaw changed very slightly. Not breaking, Logan Cross did not break in public, but the muscles under his eyes shifted in a way that was honest and involuntary and very brief. Sophie reached up and put her hand over his closed fist. He looked at her. She didn't say anything. She just held his hand, the way she'd been doing since she was small enough that his fist was bigger than both of her hands put together. Carver straightened. There was something in his posture now that hadn't been there when he walked out of the cockpit, a quality of having set something down after carrying it a long way. Then he did something that no one in the cabin was fully prepared for. He stood at attention, the precise formal posture of a senior officer in uniform, shoulders squared, chin level, eyes forward, and he raised his right hand to the brim of his cap in a full military salute, directed at a man in a worn gray Henley and scuffed boots sitting in seat 2A. The cabin was absolutely silent. Logan Cross looked at the captain for a moment. Then he returned the salute, not with the crisp perfection of someone performing ceremony, but with the natural ease of someone for whom the gesture was as ordinary as breathing. The muscle memory of 11 years in the most demanding service branch in the military cutting cleanly through the ordinary air of a commercial aircraft at 37,000 feet. It lasted 3 seconds. Carver lowered his hand. Logan lowered his. In row 5, the man in the gray suit looked like he was working to keep his face composed and losing the argument. The woman with the reading glasses was not bothering to compose her face at all. Somewhere behind Logan, in the rows he couldn't see without turning, he heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying to breathe quietly around something caught in their throat. Sophie looked at her father with the expression she'd been assembling for 8 years from the pieces she'd been given, the photographs in the box under his bed, the fragments of stories he'd told, and the larger shape of the stories he hadn't, the way people sometimes looked at him in certain contexts with a weight she'd always felt but never been able to name. She was naming it now. "Dad," she said softly. "Yeah." "Were you scared when you went in to get them?" He looked at her. The question was perfectly sincere, the kind only a child asks because adults learn too early to be afraid of the answer. "Yeah," he said. "I was scared." "But you went anyway." "That's what scared means," he said. "That something matters enough to be scary." She absorbed this with the particular gravity she brought to things that were going to stay with her. Logan could see it happening. The information filing itself somewhere permanent, the way things that are true enough find their place and stay. "Like my surgery," she said. "Like your surgery," he said. She nodded slowly, then reached for the in-ear headphones Patricia had brought her and began examining the cord with the focused attention of a child who had finished one very large thing and was moving on to a smaller one, because that was what you did. Victoria Ashford stood up. She didn't do it dramatically. No announcement, no performance. She simply stood up and walked the 3 steps from row 1 to row 2 and stopped in the aisle. And when Logan looked at her, she didn't look like a billionaire or an aviation executive or the woman who had ordered security to remove him from the seat 2 hours ago. She looked like someone who had done something that couldn't be undone and was trying to figure out what came after that. "Mr. Cross," she said. Her voice was steady. "I don't have the right words for what I need to say right now. I'm aware of that." She paused. "I'm also aware that I humiliated you in front of these people, in front of your daughter, and that telling you I'm sorry doesn't reach the actual size of what I did, but I'm telling you anyway because I don't know what else I have." Logan looked at her. "I made assumptions about you the moment I saw you," she said. "I've made assumptions like that my entire adult life, and I've been telling myself they were judgments, that they were practical, that they were about business efficiency or image or whatever language made them feel acceptable. Today was the first time they were stated out loud in front of witnesses, and She stopped. "I heard them. For the first time." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry. For what I said, for what I implied, for what I put your daughter through because I couldn't see past what you were wearing." The cabin was still listening. She knew it. She'd chosen to say it anyway. Logan was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the apology she'd given him earlier in the aisle, mid-flight. The more tentative version, the one that still had defensiveness in the corners of it. This was different. This one had been stripped down to something essential. He recognized the architecture of it the way you recognize a structure you've seen in different materials before, the same shape in a different medium. It cost her something to say it. He could see that. The cost mattered. "I hear you," he said. "I don't expect you to—" "I'm not forgiving you right now," he said clearly. "Not because I won't, but because I think it would be too easy and it wouldn't mean anything yet. What you just said was the right thing to say. What comes after it is what it'll actually mean." She nodded. There was something in her face that looked like she'd expected that, or something like it, and had decided she could live with it. "What can I do for the rest of this flight?" she asked. For Sophie specifically, what does she need? She has what she needs. What does she want then? He looked at Sophie, who was now fully installed in the in-ear headphones and had gone back to her sketchbook, apparently having decided the adult conversation had reached a phase that didn't require her active participation. "She wants the clouds to keep looking right from the window," he said, "and she wants her surgery to go well. You can't do anything about either of those." "No," Victoria said. "I suppose I can't." She stood there a moment longer, not retreating to her seat yet, not pushing for more, just standing in the acknowledgement of a situation she'd created and couldn't fully fix. Then Ray, in row 3, cleared his throat. "Ms. Ashford." His voice was carefully neutral, the tone of a professional doing his job and not his feelings. "I want to offer my own apology to Mr. Cross. I followed orders that I should have pushed back on." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't see the medical monitor on his daughter when I was standing in the aisle. I did see it. I chose not to factor it in because it was easier not to." He looked at Logan directly. "That was wrong." Logan studied him. Ray held the eye contact without flinching. "Thank you," Logan said. The younger security man from his seat near the bulkhead said nothing, but his posture had changed. The performed authority completely gone now, replaced by the genuine discomfort of someone who'd been watching a series of mirrors get held up and didn't like what they reflected. Carver, who had remained standing through all of this, looked at Logan one final time. "I'm going back to the cockpit," he said. "We're 40 minutes from descent." He paused. "I'm going to be in Washington for 2 days. If you want to, if Sophie's situation permits." He stopped. Tried again. "I'd like to buy you a very bad cup of hospital cafeteria coffee, if that's something that could happen." It was the most uncertain Logan had heard him sound. The captain who'd flown back into a compromised extraction zone in the dark was less steady asking this than he'd been doing that. Logan almost smiled. "We'll see," he said. "That's not a no." "It's not a no." Carver nodded once with the contained relief of a man who'd expected less. He replaced his cap, straightened his jacket, and walked back to the cockpit with the unhurried precision of someone who'd done everything he came out to do. The door closed behind him. Sophie took out one earbud. "Is that man a pilot?" "He's the captain," Logan said. "He flies the plane." "Oh." She put the earbud back, then took it out again. "He seemed like he'd been holding on to something for a long time." Logan looked at her. "Yeah, he had." "You too," she said. Not an accusation, just an observation, stated with the clear vision children have before they learn to look politely away. "Me too," he said. She nodded and put the earbud back. The woman with the reading glasses in row 4 reached forward and touched the shoulder of the man in the gray suit beside her. Not a word, just contact, the kind of small human gesture that doesn't need a reason. In row 1, Victoria Ashford sat down and picked up one of her phones, and then put it back down, and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing visible, doing whatever people do when something has arrived in them that hasn't found its place yet. Logan Cross held the coin Carver had given him and turned it once in his fingers, feeling the edges, the weight. Different coin, different inscription, same principle. The proof of a thing that happened, that mattered, that changed the shape of the world even though the world didn't know about it. He put it in his left cargo pocket. Sophie's monitor read steady numbers. Outside the window, the winter sun had shifted with the angle of the flight, and the cloud floor below them had changed from flat white to something textured and complex. The kind of topography that existed only up here, at altitude, where the ordinary rules of what was ground and what was sky stopped applying. Sophie was drawing it. He could see the shapes emerging on the page, not photorealistic, but true, the way her drawings were always true to something underneath the surface of the thing she was looking at. She was drawing the clouds the way they felt rather than the way they appeared. He'd always thought that was the more honest version. 40 minutes to descent, to Washington, to the hospital where 6 people were going to spend 6 hours doing the most careful work that could be done, and where Logan Cross would sit in a waiting room and be absolutely still and hold every piece of himself together by whatever means were available because falling apart was not on the schedule. He'd done it before. He'd do it again. But right now he was here, at altitude, with his daughter's pencil moving across a page and a coin in his pocket that he hadn't earned anything additional by receiving, and the strange, compressed truth of what happened when 2 separate chapters of a life collided without warning in a space too small to avoid each other. He was here. For now, that was enough. The descent announcement came 42 minutes after Carver went back through the cockpit door, right on schedule, the way the mechanical parts of life continued being reliable regardless of what the human parts had just done. Sophie took out her earbuds and stored them in the small zippered pouch she carried for exactly that purpose, which Logan had labeled with a strip of masking tape that read, Sophie's Things. Do not lose in his handwriting, which she found embarrassing and he found practical, and they had agreed to disagree about for 2 years. She zipped it shut and put it in the front pocket of her backpack, then zipped that too. How long until we land? She asked. 40 minutes, maybe less. She pressed her palm to the window again, looking down through the break in the clouds at the terrain below. The gray-brown geometry of eastern landscape in winter, roads and tree lines, and the distant glint of something that might have been a river. It looks like my drawing, she said, from far away. Which one? The one I did of the neighborhood, from my bedroom window. She studied the ground below with the particular focus she brought to things she intended to draw later. Everything looks like a drawing from up here, like someone already did it. Logan didn't say anything to that. He let it sit. The cabin had shifted again in the 40 minutes since Carver's return to the cockpit. Not dramatically, not in any way that would be obvious to someone who hadn't been paying attention to the quality of the silence. But Logan had been paying attention. He always did. The performance of normalcy that first-class passengers maintained as a kind of social contract, the studied disinterest, the deliberate immersion in their own screens and reading, had been replaced by something more honest and less comfortable. People were sitting with what they'd witnessed. He could see it in the way the man in the gray suit held his book open without reading it, the way the woman with the reading glasses had put them on and then taken them off twice without looking at anything. The younger security man near the bulkhead had his elbows on his knees and was looking at the floor with the specific quality of attention that meant he was looking inward. This was the part nobody talked about, not the confrontation, not the revelation, not the moment the captain saluted a man in a worn Henley in front of 20 witnesses. The part nobody talked about was what happened in the 40 minutes after, when the adrenaline of witnessing something significant had metabolized into the quieter and less comfortable work of sitting with what it meant. Ray had not gone back to sleep. He was sitting in row 3 with his arms folded and his eyes forward, and twice in the last half hour Logan had felt the man looking at him. Not hostile, not measuring, something more conflicted than either. Logan hadn't acknowledged it. He understood the feeling behind it without needing it addressed. Victoria Ashford had not picked up her phone again. That was the thing Logan kept noticing. Both phones were in her lap, dark screens, untouched. Her team had continued working, the quiet industry of people with actual deadlines. But Victoria herself had been still since she'd sat back down, the kind of still that meant the interior work was happening whether she'd invited it or not. He wasn't watching her. He was aware of her, which was different. Sophie tapped his arm. Dad. Yeah. That woman. The one from before. The one who said sorry. What about her? Do you think she meant it the second time? He looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the direct brown eyes that never learned to be tactful about the things they wanted to know. I think she was starting to, he said. Sophie accepted this. There's a difference between knowing you did something wrong and feeling it, she said, with the particular certainty of a child who'd worked this out from personal experience. Like when I told Marcus at school that his drawing was bad, and I knew right away that was wrong, but I didn't feel how wrong until I saw his face. Yeah, Logan said. That's exactly the difference. She nodded, satisfied with the correlation, and turned back to the window. He thought about Marcus, whom he'd never met, the second-grade boy whose drawing Sophie had criticized and apologized to 3 days later with a handwritten note that had taken her 40 minutes to compose. He'd found the drafts in the recycling bin, 6 attempts before the one she kept. He'd never told her he found them. Some things you keep to yourself. The descent steepened slightly. Sophie's ears popped and she worked her jaw the way he'd taught her, yawning, swallowing, and the discomfort passed. Her monitor stayed steady. He checked it without touching it. 13 minutes later, when the landing gear locked down with its familiar heavy clunk, and Sophie grabbed his arm with both hands out of pure reflex, Logan heard movement from row 1. Victoria Ashford had stood up. She wasn't preparing to deplane. They were still 4 minutes from the gate, seatbelt sign still on. She stood in the aisle and looked at the forward galley, then seemed to make a decision, and walked back to row 2 against the implicit pressure of altitude and preparation and the mild, wordless disapproval of Patricia, who was strapped into her jump seat, and watched Ms. Ashford stand in an unsecured aisle 2 minutes before landing with the expression of someone who'd long since given up on certain passengers following certain rules. Victoria crouched in the aisle. Actually crouched, suit and all, bringing herself to Sophie's eye level through the gap between the seats, which was an awkward posture that she made no attempt to make graceful. Sophie looked at her with the neutral assessment she gave to things she hadn't categorized yet. "I wanted to tell you something before we land," Victoria said. To Sophie, not to Logan. Sophie waited. "What happened today? The way my team and I behaved toward your father. That was wrong. I don't want you to think that's how things are supposed to work, or that the way someone looks is any kind of information about who they are." Sophie studied her. "I already knew that." "I know," Victoria said. "I'm not telling you because you don't know. I'm telling you because it happened in front of you, and I wanted you to hear from me specifically that it was wrong." She paused. "And because your father wouldn't tell you that it cost him something to sit through that, but it did, and you should know that too." Sophie looked at Logan. He kept his face neutral. He hadn't expected that. The specific precision of what she'd said, the fact that she'd looked at his daughter and addressed the thing that actually needed addressing rather than the thing that was easier to say. "Is that why you were so quiet?" Sophie asked him. "Because it cost you something?" "Some things you just absorb," he said. "That doesn't sound fun." "It's not always about fun." She considered this, then looked back at Victoria. "He's always like that," she said, with the particular mix of pride and mild frustration that children have about their parents' defining characteristics. "He absorbs things. He doesn't say when they're hard." "I noticed," Victoria said. "It's a Navy thing," Sophie said, with the authority of someone who diagnosed this years ago. "I'll take your word for it." The wheels touched down. The controlled collision of landing, the scream of reverse thrust, the weight of deceleration pressing everyone forward in their belts. Victoria gripped the armrest of the aisle seat to steady herself. Sophie's hands tightened on Logan's arm and released as the plane slowed to taxi speed and normalcy reasserted itself. Victoria stood up, smoothed her jacket, and went back to row one without ceremony. Logan watched her go. He still didn't know what she was. He decided to stop trying to know from a distance. The gate took 6 minutes to reach. In those 6 minutes, Sophie put her sketchbook in her backpack and zipped every pocket in the specific order she always used, and Logan retrieved the duffel from the overhead bin and checked his left cargo pocket. Letter, coin, phone, and the forward cabin completed the ritual transformation from people in flight to people preparing to be somewhere. When the seatbelt sign went off, Victoria Ashford stood and turned to her team. Logan couldn't hear the exchange, but he saw the silver-templed man, whose name he still didn't know, react with a brief visible surprise, and the others exchanged glances that contained a rapid private conversation. And then the team began collecting their things with slightly different energy than they'd had when they boarded. Ray was standing, holding his jacket, and he looked at Logan across the row. "Mr. Cross," he said, "for whatever it's worth, the thing you did 4 years ago, I've known people who do that work. Not many, but some." He paused, choosing. "It means something to people who understand what it costs." Logan nodded once. "Appreciate it." Ray put on his jacket and became a professional again, which was a kind of dignity too. Daniel appeared at the front of the cabin, the perpetual calm of a good purser intact despite everything. "Mr. Cross, we'll hold the forward door for 2 minutes to allow you to deplane first with Sophie. There's a wheelchair assistance team waiting at the gate. We called ahead." "She can walk," Logan said. "I know, but it means a cart to the terminal entrance and no line at the accessibility exit. Saves you 20 minutes. He looked at Sophie, who looked back at him. "A cart?" she said. "Like a golf cart," he said. "In the terminal." She appeared to evaluate the dignity implications of this. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm walking to the cart myself." "Obviously," he said. He stood, duffel on his shoulder, and Sophie put on her backpack with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd packed it in a specific weight distribution. She did this every time. He'd never once commented on it. Victoria appeared beside them at the aisle. She was holding something. It took Logan a moment to register what it was because he hadn't expected it. A business card, which was unremarkable, and a folded piece of paper, Which was? My direct cell, she said, touching the card. Not the assistant line. Mine. She held out both. And this is the contact information for the director of the Ashford Foundation's Pediatric Cardiac Program. We fund research at 11 hospitals, including the center where Sophie is having her procedure. Logan looked at her. I'm not trying to buy my way out of what I did, she said, and the fact that she said it first made it less necessary to think. Dr. Okafor is an excellent surgeon, and Sophie is in good hands, I know that. This is just, if there's something in the aftercare, the recovery, the follow-up, something the insurance doesn't cover or takes too long, I want you to have a path that isn't another 90-minute phone call with a coordinator. She held his gaze. You mentioned that call, in the aisle, before. I heard you. He took the card and the paper. He didn't say it changed everything, because it didn't. It was a gesture in a direction which was different from arriving at a destination. He understood the difference, and he thought she was beginning to. Thank you, he said. The same 2 words he'd given Ray. Sincere both times, for different reasons. Sophie looked at the business card in Logan's hand with the assessing expression of someone who'd learned early what cards were and weren't in the adult world. Will she be okay? Victoria asked. She'd dropped her voice, addressed it to Logan, but her eyes went to Sophie. The team is good, he said. She's strong. She is, Victoria said, and she looked at Sophie with something direct and honest. I can see that. Sophie, who had been listening to all of this with the quiet, comprehensive attention she brought to adult conversations, looked at Victoria with the same steady gaze she'd had since the beginning. You're different than you were this morning, she said. Victoria absorbed this without flinching. I am. What changed? It was the question with no tactful version of itself, the kind only Sophie would ask, the kind that landed in a room and took up exactly the space it needed. Victoria thought about it. Not the performed pause of someone buying time, but actual consideration. I was looking at everyone in this cabin this morning as a variable, she said, something that either helped or didn't help a problem I was trying to solve. I stopped seeing people. She paused. Your father made it very difficult to keep doing that. Because he wouldn't move? Because he was so still. While I was being loud and wrong, he was completely still. It made me feel the noise of what I was doing. She seemed surprised at her own articulation of it. And then you drew the rein on the wing. Sophie blinked. You saw that? Patricia showed me. While you were sleeping. Victoria glanced at Logan, anticipating something. She didn't violate anything. She just described it. The way you were drawing, what you were drawing. She thought I needed to see something true. Patricia, still in the vicinity of the galley, appeared to find something very interesting on the ceiling. Sophie pulled the sketchbook from her backpack and opened it to the page. The wing, the rein, the small figure in the seat. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at Victoria. She tore the page out carefully, along the edge, and held it out. Logan started to say something and stopped himself. This was Sophie's thing to give. Victoria took it. She looked at it for a long moment, the drawing that was both what it appeared to be and something more specific than that, the way Sophie's drawings always carried the thing underneath the surface. Thank you, Victoria said, and her voice was different on those 2 words than it had been on anything else she'd said all morning. She went back to row 1 and held the page and didn't put it in her bag or fold it, just held it. The forward door opened. The jet bridge connected with a bump. Daniel stepped aside and made a small gesture, after you, and Logan put his hand on Sophie's shoulder and they walked off the plane together, into the jet bridge, into the terminal, into Washington. The cart was there, a small electric vehicle piloted by a man in an orange vest who introduced himself as Gerald and spoke to Sophie with the natural warmth of someone who'd spent years doing this specific job and had decided somewhere along the way to do it as well as possible. You comfortable? Gerald asked, as Sophie climbed into the back seat with her backpack on her lap. Is this fast? She asked. I can make it fast, Gerald said. Okay, she said. Yes, please. Logan sat beside her. Gerald pulled into the terminal stream with the expert navigation of someone who'd made this run 1,000 times, and the gate fell away behind them, and Washington opened up ahead. The long corridors and the moving walkways, and the particular smell of airports that was universal and nowhere and everywhere at once. Sophie watched the terminal go by. Dad? Yeah. That lady, Victoria. What about her? I think she's going to be different after today. You think so? She took my drawing, Sophie said. People only take drawings if they're going to look at them. She paused, with the confidence of a child who'd given enough drawings to have developed a theory about this. If you were just being polite, you'd say thank you and leave it. She took it. Logan thought about that. He thought about the way Victoria had held the page, not sliding it into a bag or a folder, just held it, the way you hold something you're not done with. Yeah, he said. Maybe. Definitely, Sophie said, with the certainty she reserved for things she'd already decided. They rode in silence for a moment. Gerald navigated a crowd around a gate with practiced ease, cutting wide and then close again. Are you scared? Sophie asked. Not about the cart, not about the airport. A little, Logan said, because she'd asked him an honest question, and she was owed an honest answer. About the surgery. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Me too. Then, but you said being scared means something matters. I did say that. So we're both scared, which means it matters. That's one way to read it. Is there another way? He thought about it. No, he said. I think that's the right way. She leaned against his arm the same way she had on the plane, the same weight, the same angle, fitting into the space between his shoulder and his ribs like she'd been designed for it, which in some sense she had, the specific physics of a child and the parent who'd carried her. They reached the terminal exit in 4 minutes. Gerald delivered them to the ground transportation desk with the quiet satisfaction of a job done exactly right, and when Sophie told him the cart was fast enough, Gerald smiled like she'd said something that would stay with him. Logan helped Sophie down and was reaching for his phone to check the hospital transport confirmation when he heard his name. He turned. Victoria Ashford was walking toward him from the direction of the arriving terminal. She'd deplaned after them, moved faster through the terminal than he'd expected. She was alone. Her team was not with her. She was carrying her own bag. He waited. She stopped in front of him with the slightly out-of-breath quality of someone who'd moved with purpose, not the composed entrance she'd made on the plane, something less curated. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need to tell you before I think about it too long and make it political. He waited. Marcus Webb, she said, my security director, the one who pressured your daughter's seat. I'm terminating his contract today. Logan was quiet for a moment. Because of what happened on the plane. Because what happened on the plane was the version of something he does regularly that happened to have witnesses, she said. I've had complaints. Low level, from staff, from contractors. I filed them and moved on because he was effective at his job and I was confusing effective with good. She held his eyes. I'm not anymore. That's your business decision, Logan said. It is, but I wanted you to know that it's not performance. I'm not doing it for the optics of having done it. I'm doing it because I looked at what I saw today and I understood, maybe for the first time, that the culture of an organization is the behavior you tolerate from the people who report to you. She paused. I've been tolerating the wrong things. He studied her face. He'd gotten good at reading people under pressure. Not perfect, never perfect, but better than most. What he saw was someone who had been cracked open by a sequence of events they hadn't controlled and was now doing the uncomfortable work of examining what the crack revealed. He didn't feel satisfaction about it. He felt something more neutral, the way you feel when a system corrects itself at. Not triumph, just the quiet acknowledgement that correction had occurred. The things you tolerate become the things you stand for, he said, whether you intended that or not. She nodded slowly. Yes, exactly that. She looked at Sophie, who was watching with the unhidden attention she brought to things she considered important. How long will you be in Washington? As long as she needs, Logan said. I'm here until Thursday. She seemed to be working something out. If there's anything at all that the medical team needs, any authorization that would move things faster, I have relationships at that hospital, not leverage. Relationships. She was careful about the distinction. I don't want to insert myself into something that isn't my situation, but I want you to know the option exists. I have your card, Logan said. I know. She seemed to be looking for more to say and deciding against it. I'll let you go. She turned and he let her get 3 steps before he said it. Not because he'd planned to, but because something Sophie had said on the cart was still working through him, the thing about people who take drawings being people who intend to look at them. Victoria. She stopped, turned. I forgive you, he said. Not because what happened didn't matter. It did. Sophie doesn't forget things. I don't forget things. He paused. But carrying it is more weight than I need right now, so I'm putting it down. He looked at her steadily. What you do next is your own story. I hope it's a better one. She stood with that for a moment. Something moved through her face that she didn't cover. It will be, she said. Not a promise to him, more like a statement to herself, made in front of a witness, which was its own kind of binding. She left. Sophie watched her go, then looked at Logan with the expression that meant she was assembling something. You didn't tell her she was forgiven because she deserved it, Sophie said. No. You told her because you needed to. He looked at his daughter. Sometimes she did this, arrived at the true thing with such directness that there was nothing to do but receive it. Yeah, he said. That's right. She nodded, accepting this, cataloging it somewhere. That's what Mrs. Patterson says about apologies too, she said. That you do it for yourself, not for the other person. She considered. I think forgiveness might be the same. I think you might be right, he said. The ground transportation desk was 10 feet away. The hospital transport van was confirmed for 12:40, which was 11 minutes from now. Logan checked the monitor, checked Sophie's color, checked the pocket with the letter and the coin, and now also Victoria Ashford's business card and the phone number of someone who ran a pediatric cardiac foundation. The ordinary logistics of keeping a small person safe and moving forward in the world. He picked up the duffel. Ready? He said. Ready, she said. But she didn't move immediately. She was looking at the spot where Victoria Ashford had been standing, the ordinary terminal floor, people moving past it in every direction, nobody looking at it except Sophie. Dad? She said. Yeah. Do you think people know, mostly, when they're being wrong, in the moment? He thought about the question seriously because she'd asked it seriously. Sometimes. More often they know and find a way not to think about it. Because it's easier. Because it's easier. But some of them figure it out, she said. Eventually. Some of them, he said. Yeah. She looked at the floor for another moment, then looked up at him with the eyes that were her mother's and the set of the jaw that was his and the composite thing that was only ever and completely Sophie. I think she'll figure it out, she said. She already started. Then she picked up her backpack straps and turned toward the transportation desk, and Logan Cross walked beside her through the Washington terminal with the duffel on his shoulder and the coin in his pocket and 6 hours of surgical waiting ahead of him. And the particular quality of his silence was the same as it had always been. Not empty, not performing, just full of everything that didn't need to be said out loud to be completely, undeniably true. 3 rows of plastic chairs lined the ground transportation waiting area. Sophie chose the one facing the window so she could see outside, and she opened her sketchbook to a new page before they'd even fully sat down. What are you drawing? He asked. She looked out the window at the gray Washington afternoon. The low sky, the bare trees past the terminal glass, the movement of vehicles in the pickup lane. I don't know yet, she said. I'll know when I start. She started. He watched the door. The van came 3 minutes early, which was not something he'd planned for and was therefore the best possible thing. The van driver's name was Curtis, and he had the radio on low, something instrumental, nothing Logan could name. And he drove through the Washington afternoon with the unhurried competence of someone who knew every light sequence on this particular route and had made peace with all of them. Sophie sat with her sketchbook open on her knees but wasn't drawing. She was watching the city go by with the fixed attention she gave to things she was trying to memorize. The bare trees and the gray stone buildings and the way the winter light came down flat and honest without the warmth to soften it. It looks serious, she said. Washington? All the buildings. Like they're trying to look important. Most of them are, Logan said. Is the hospital like that? No, hospitals just look like hospitals. She seemed to find this reassuring. Curtis took a left onto a wide avenue and the medical center appeared ahead. Not a single building, but a complex of them, connected by covered walkways, the main entrance marked by a wide awning, and the particular foot traffic of a place where serious things happened on a schedule. Logan had studied the layout from the satellite view so many times that seeing it in person had the quality of returning to somewhere he'd never actually been. Sophie looked at it through the window without saying anything. He watched her face. She had a way of preparing herself that she'd developed young, a going inward that wasn't withdrawal, more like gathering. She did it before hard things. He'd seen her do it in waiting rooms, before appointments, before the first day of school after a stretch of medical absence. She collected herself quietly, without ceremony, the way you collect things you might need for a long walk. She was doing it now. Hey, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to be ready right this second. We check in first. Then you meet the team. Then it's tomorrow. I know. I just mean, you don't have to be brave yet. She considered this. When do I have to be brave? Tomorrow. In the morning, when they take you in. And before that? Before that, you can just be Sophie. She looked at him for a long moment with the eyes that had always seen too much of him, that had been seeing too much of him since she was old enough to have preferences about which face he came home wearing. You do the same thing, she said, the going inward thing, before hard things. Probably, he said. You're doing it right now. He didn't argue with her. Curtis pulled under the main awning and put the van in park, and the intake process began. The particular choreography of hospital arrival. A coordinator with a tablet meeting them at the curb. A brief exchange of information Logan had memorized but recited from the printed sheet anyway, because he'd learned long ago that reading from the paper conveyed a different thing than speaking from memory. Told the staff something about the kind of father they were dealing with and how they should calibrate their communication. The coordinator's name was Brienne. She was in her early 30s, efficient in a way that wasn't cold, and she crouched slightly to address Sophie at something closer to eye level without going all the way to the condescending crouch adults sometimes did. Sophie, I'm going to walk you and your dad through our intake process. It's going to take about an hour, and most of it is pretty boring. Is there anything you want to know before we go in? Sophie thought about it. Is Dr. Okafor here today? She is. She'll come by after your initial assessments. Okay, Sophie nodded. That's all I needed to know. They went inside. The next 3 hours were the particular experience of a children's cardiac center. Not the sterile impersonality Logan had braced for, but something more lived in, the walls carrying murals that weren't condescending, the staff moving with a kind of focused warmth that came from spending years in the specific atmosphere of children facing serious things and learning that competence and kindness were not competing values. Sophie had her vitals taken by a nurse named Damon, who explained everything before he did it and asked her to tell him if anything felt wrong and called her by her name every time, not once as sweetheart or honey or any of the diminutives that well-meaning adults reached for around sick children as though childhood was itself a vulnerability requiring softening. Sophie noticed. She always noticed. She told Logan afterward, in the room they'd been assigned for the pre-surgical stay, that she liked Damon because he talked to her like she was a person. That's the baseline, Logan said. I know, she said, but not everyone clears it. She wasn't wrong. Dr. Mira Okafor arrived at 4:40. She was 46, compact and direct, with the particular quality of a surgeon who had long since burned through every version of false comfort and arrived at the other side of that fire at something more useful. A precise, humane honesty that didn't blunt the hard parts but didn't abandon you inside them either. She sat across from Logan and Sophie in the room's 2 visitor chairs, which she pulled close rather than leaving in their default positions against the wall. How are you doing? She asked Sophie. Nervous, Sophie said, but I know what's happening, so it's better than before I knew. What do you know? Sophie recited it with the flatness of something memorized through repetition. You're going to close the hole in my heart. It's been there since I was born. Without fixing it, my heart works harder than it should and eventually causes problems. With fixing it, I have a normal life expectancy, and I can do most things normally. She paused. The surgery takes about 6 hours. I'll be under general anesthesia, so I won't feel it or remember it. Recovery is 4 to 6 weeks. The first 2 weeks are the most restricted. Okafor looked at Logan. She read the literature, he said. You let her. She asked. She's better when she knows things. Okafor nodded, making a note. Sophie, are there things you want to ask me that you haven't been able to ask yet? Sophie thought about it seriously. Is there a part you're worried about? The directness of it landed in the room and sat there. Logan watched Okafor receive it. There's a part that requires precision, Okafor said. Not that I'm worried about it. It's within our standard procedure, but it requires care. The area around your pulmonary valve. I'll be paying particular attention there. But you've done it before. Many times. And those went okay? Most of them, Okafor said. Not all of them. Most. The honest number. Sophie absorbed that. Okay, she said. I trust you. I'll earn it, Okafor said, which was the right answer. She spent another 20 minutes with them going through the morning schedule. Nothing to eat after midnight, pre-op at 6:30, procedure starting at 8. Logan would receive updates every 90 minutes through the family coordinator. She answered Logan's questions with the efficiency of someone who respected that he'd done his homework, didn't re-explain what he clearly already knew, and filled the actual gaps. When she left, she shook Sophie's hand. Not waved, not patted. Shook, the way you do with a person you take seriously. Sophie watched her go. She's good, she said. Yeah, Logan said. She is. How do you know? Because she told you about the part that requires care, instead of telling you everything was going to be fine. Sophie considered this. Because if everything was going to be fine, she wouldn't need to be careful. Right. She lay back on the hospital pillow and looked at the ceiling, which had a mural of some kind. He hadn't looked closely, didn't look now. Dad? Yeah. Tell me something true. It was a thing she'd started asking at 6 after Claire died, in the period when adults kept telling Sophie things that turned out not to be true, that her mother was going to be okay, and then that her mother had gone somewhere better, and then various soft confections of language that were meant kindly and landed as noise. Sophie had started asking for true things specifically. Logan had started providing them as best he could. He thought about what was true right now, in this room, in this city, on this day. You've been waiting for this for 8 years, he said, and you've handled every part of it. The waiting, the monitoring, the restrictions, the appointments, the uncertainty, without losing your ability to find things worth drawing. That's not small. That's not something everyone can do. She was quiet. And the team here is good, he continued. Not perfect. Okafor told you that herself because she's honest, but good. And tomorrow is the day you've been building toward your whole life. And after it, there's a version of your life that looks different than this one. Better. More open, he said, because better was a promise he couldn't make and she would hear the difference. She accepted more open. What will you do while I'm in surgery? Wait. For 6 hours? That's what waiting rooms are for. Will you be okay? He looked at her. His 8-year-old daughter asking him if he would be okay while she was in surgery from the hospital bed, with the monitoring sensor still at her waistband and the pre-surgical wristband already on her arm. I'll be fine, he said. That's not true, she said without heat. But it's okay. You don't have to be okay. You just have to still be there when I wake up. I'll be there, he said. That one, I believe, she said. She fell asleep at 8:47. He noted the time without planning to, the habit of someone who cataloged things. And he sat in the chair beside her bed in the quiet of the room, with the corridor sounds coming through the gap at the bottom of the door, and thought about nothing for a while, which was the closest he ever got to rest. His phone showed 2 texts that had come in during intake. The first was from a number he didn't have saved, James Carver. The coffee offer stands. No pressure. C. He'd gotten the number somehow, which didn't surprise Logan. Carver had always been resourceful about the things he wanted to follow through on. The second was from a number he also didn't have saved, but recognized as the one on the card Victoria Ashford had given him. Mr. Cross, I spoke with Dr. Okafor's department coordinator this afternoon. Nothing has been changed or influenced. I only wanted to ensure that if any administrative barriers arise during Sophie's stay, there is a direct line available to remove them. The foundation contact I gave you has been briefed. You don't need to do anything with that unless you need to. I hope tomorrow goes well. He read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on his knee and sat in the chair and listened to Sophie breathe. He thought about the morning, the gate agent's cheerful scan of the boarding pass, the way the first-class cabin had felt when he sat down. Ordinary, temporary, a place to be for a few hours and then leave. The way Victoria Ashford had walked on that plane and the decision she'd made before she'd said a single word, the architecture of an assumption built on the quickest possible reading of the most surface information available. He didn't feel anger about it anymore. He'd been honest with himself, in the smaller moments of the morning, about what he'd actually felt when Ray stepped into the aisle, not the composed stillness he'd presented, but underneath it, the particular exhaustion of a man who was already carrying a weight he hadn't chosen and was being asked to spend energy defending the right to carry it. The anger had been there. He'd felt it precisely and set it aside precisely, and it had cost him something, the way it always costs something. He told Sophie that some things you absorb. What he hadn't told her was that absorbed didn't mean gone. It meant internal. It meant handled without becoming a weapon, which was a different thing than not feeling it. He was allowed to have felt it. He sat with that for a while. Around 10:30, he took out the sketchbook. Sophie had left it on the bedside table, and looked at the drawings from the day. The wing in the rain, the small figure sitting straight, the cloud drawings, 4 pages of them, each one finding something different in the same subject, the headrests, the partial drawing of Washington through the van window that she'd started in the transportation area, the bare trees rendered in quick lines that were more about movement than about branches. At the back, a page he hadn't seen her draw. He would have said it was impossible to do without him noticing, but Sophie had learned to draw in the peripheral blind spots of adult attention the way some children learn to read under the covers, quietly, in whatever light was available. It was a drawing of 2 people, one tall, sitting straight, the posture so specific that he recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting. One small, leaning against the tall one's arm at an angle that was completely specific, completely right, the angle she'd been at since she was too small to generate it intentionally. She'd written something at the bottom of the page, small letters in the careful print she used when she wanted something to be read correctly. Respect begins when we see the person before the appearance. He sat with that for a long time. He didn't know when she'd written it or where it had come from, whether it was something she'd heard and retained or something she'd arrived at on her own in the compressed experience of this particular day. With Sophie, the line between the two was often unclear. She collected things and processed them, and they came back out in her own form, the way all learning worked when it was actually working. He closed the sketchbook and set it back on the bedside table. Outside, Washington was doing what cities did at night, the ambient light on the ceiling shifting slightly as cloud cover moved, the corridor sounds settling into their overnight rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, very faintly, a child was crying, and then stopped. Logan Cross sat beside his daughter and did what he'd been doing since she was 4 days old, and a doctor had sat across from him in a room not unlike this one and explained what was wrong and what might be possible and what they couldn't promise. He held everything together through an act of pure will that looked like stillness from the outside and felt like its own kind of work from the inside, and he let the night pass. Morning came the way mornings in hospitals always came, earlier than expected, more lit than you were ready for, with people who were professionally kind appearing in doorways and asking Sophie how she'd slept and whether she was ready, and calling her by her name, always by her name, which Logan registered each time because it was the thing that mattered most and the thing most easily forgotten in institutional environments. Sophie had slept better than he expected. She told him so herself, and she wasn't a child who softened reports to make people feel better. So he believed her. She was quiet while she got ready. Not the going inward quiet of yesterday. Something different, more settled. Like she'd done the preparation and arrived on the other side of it at a kind of ground. At 6:15, Damon came with the pre-op cart, and he explained what each thing was before he did it. And Sophie asked one question about the IV placement that Damon answered without talking down to her. And Logan stood at the side of the bed and watched, and did not look away from any of it, because looking away would have been for his own comfort, not hers. And it wasn't his comfort that was the job right now. At 6:50, they wheeled her toward the pre-op area. The corridor was longer than he'd prepared for. He walked beside the bed, his hand near hers, but not gripping. He'd learned early that gripping communicated his anxiety more than it communicated his presence, and she needed his presence. She reached for his hand at the double doors. Not from fear. He could feel the difference by now, the particular quality of the grip, but just to mark the moment, the place where one part ended and another began. "I'll be right here," he said, "when you're done." "I know," she said, the same two words she'd given back to him since she could talk. Statement of fact. Belief without performance. "I love you," he said. "I love you too, Dad." The doors open. They wheeled her through. He stood at those doors for a moment after they closed. The way you stand in a place where something significant has just happened and the air hasn't fully settled yet. And then he walked back to the family waiting area and found a chair that faced the door and sat down in it and was still. The waiting room was half full at 7 in the morning. Other families, other chairs, the quiet solidarity of people who were all doing the same thing in their own private version of it. Nobody looked at each other directly. Nobody had to. He got coffee from a machine down the hall that produced something in the approximate category of coffee, and he drank it standing up and then went back to the chair. At 9:12, his phone lit up. An unknown number. DC area code. He answered it. "Cross, Carver's voice. "I'm downstairs in the lobby. You don't have to come down. I'm here, if that means anything." Logan sat with that for a moment. "What floor is the lobby?" he said. "Ground?" "Give me 5 minutes." He told the family coordinator where he'd be and took the elevator down. Carver was standing near the main entrance in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, no cap, and looked less like a captain and more like a man in his mid-50s who hadn't slept particularly well and hadn't tried to hide it. He held 2 cups of coffee from somewhere outside the hospital. Not the machine kind. He handed one to Logan without saying anything about it. They stood near the window that looked out at the awning and the street beyond, and Logan drank the coffee, which was better than the machine version in the way that all things procured with effort were better than things produced without it. "She go in okay?" Carver asked. "Yeah, she was steady." "Takes after you." "She's steadier than me," Logan said. "Honest?" Carver looked at him sideways. "How long?" 6 hours. "Okafor's good." "I know Okafor's reputation," Carver said. "It's excellent." They stood in silence for a while, the comfortable kind which was only possible between people who'd shared something real. "Yesterday," Logan said, "on the plane. You didn't have to do that." "I know. It was a lot. In a public way." "I know that too," Carver said. "I've been thinking about whether it was the right call since the moment I did it." He looked at his coffee. "I still think it was, but I understand if you disagree." "I don't disagree," Logan said. I've spent 3 years trying not to be that story." "I know, and I'm sorry for that part of it." Carver paused. "But the people in that cabin needed to see something, and you needed to receive something, whether you wanted to or not. Both of those things were true at the same time." Logan thought about the woman with the reading glasses, the man in the gray suit who'd put his phone away, Ray, who'd told him it meant something to people who understood the cost. "Yeah," he said, "both of those things were true." They finished the coffee. Carver stayed another 40 minutes, which was enough and not too long. He had the social calibration of someone who understood that presence was the thing, not duration, and that the two were easily confused. When he left, he shook Logan's hand and held it a beat longer than a standard handshake, and Logan let him, because some things needed the extra second to be said with them. The coffee was good, Logan said. There's a place 2 blocks east, Ethiopian, opens at 7. Carver put his hands in his jacket pockets. I'll be in Washington until Thursday. You said. I'm just confirming. I heard you the first time, James. Carver almost smiled. Right, good luck, to Sophie. Yeah, Logan said. Thanks. He went back upstairs. The day moved the way waiting days move, at 2 speeds simultaneously, each hour both too long and too short, the mind finding its way to places it was trying to avoid, and then finding its way back out again. He thought about Claire once, in the late morning, in the specific way he allowed himself to think about her. Not the illness, not the end of it, but the earlier version. The version that had existed before the diagnosis, when she was just a woman who laughed at things Logan found only mildly funny and drew better than Sophie did, and told him once that the thing she loved most about him was that he was exactly the same person alone in a room as he was in front of people. He'd thought that was a strange thing to love. He understood it better now, so. Sophie was in surgery for 6 hours and 19 minutes. Okafor came out at 2:23 with her surgical cap still on, and her expression composed in the specific way that could mean several things, and Logan read it from across the room before she reached him. It meant okay. She's stable, Okafor said. The procedure went well. The valve area required a longer repair than anticipated, but we got full closure, and the cardiac function we're seeing in recovery is consistent with what we'd hoped for post-repair. She paused. She'll be in recovery for about 2 hours. You can see her when she moves to the cardiac care unit. Logan sat down. Not dramatically. He simply ran out of the requirement to stand. Thank you, he said. Okafor sat in the chair next to him, which he hadn't expected. She told me something this morning, she said, in pre-op, before we put her under. He looked at her. She said, and I'm quoting because I wrote it down, I'm not scared anymore. I was scared yesterday on the plane, and my dad told me being scared means something matters. But now I'm not scared because I already decided it matters, and there's nothing left to be scared about. Logan looked at the floor. She's 8 years old, Okafor said. Not to comment on it, just because it was true and worth saying. She's always been older than 8, Logan said. Yes, Okafor said, and that's a hard way to be 8. She stood up. Go get something to eat. Not from the machine. You have 2 hours. She left. Logan sat for a while longer, in the chair, in the waiting room, in the particular aftermath of a thing that had been feared for a long time and resolved in the direction of the better outcome, which was not the same as knowing everything was fine, but was the closest available thing to it, and he held on to it with both hands. He did not go get something to eat. He sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance and thought, for the first time in a long time, about what came next. Not the recovery. He had the recovery plan, the 4 to 6 weeks, the specific restrictions, the follow-up schedule. Not the logistics. Beyond the logistics. Sophie running, Sophie swimming, Sophie doing the things her heart hadn't been able to safely sustain, the things she'd watched other kids do without asking why she couldn't, because she'd absorbed at some point that the question would cost Logan something to answer. He wanted to tell her she could ask. He'd tell her when she woke up. He thought about her note in the sketchbook. Respect begins when we see the person before the appearance. He thought about Victoria Ashford holding that page on the plane, not putting it away. He took out his phone and typed a message to the number he hadn't saved. Surgery went well. Sophie is in recovery. Thank you for what you did with the coordinator. I didn't need it, but knowing it was there was something. Cross. He sent it before he thought too long about whether to. The response came 4 minutes later. I'm glad. Please tell Sophie I said so when she can hear it. And thank you for what you said at the airport. The part about what comes next being its own story. I've been thinking about it all day. He read it once and put the phone away. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, Logan brought Sophie home to their house in a town that wasn't Washington and wasn't remarkable. A house with a garage and a backyard and a second floor where the light came in wrong in the mornings, and a kitchen where the second burner on the left ran hotter than the others. Sophie came through the front door on her own 2 feet, moving carefully the way the discharge instructions specified. and she went immediately to the window that looked out at the backyard and stood there for a while. "It looks the same," she said. "It is the same. I thought it might look different." "You look different," he said. "Same yard." She turned to look at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether that was a compliment. She decided it was. She set her backpack down, carefully, the way she did everything carefully now, the new physical vocabulary of someone relearning the geometry of their own body. And she took out the sketchbook. "I want to draw the yard," she said. "Okay. From the window. I'll get you a chair." He got the chair from the kitchen, the one with the slight wobble he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and set it in front of the window. She sat down and opened the sketchbook and looked at the yard for a long moment before she touched the pencil to the page. He made tea. He made it badly, because he always made it badly, and brought it anyway, and she drank it without commenting on the quality, which was her version of being kind. They stayed like that for a while. Her drawing, him watching her draw, the winter light coming through the window and the yard being exactly what it was. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "On the plane, when that woman told you to move. Were you angry?" He looked at the yard. "Yeah," he said. "I was." "But you didn't show it." "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to say the true thing in a way that was useful and not just honest. Because anger wasn't the tool for that situation. If I'd been angry, she'd have had something to push back against. The stillness was harder for her to deal with than the anger would have been. Sophie kept drawing. "Is that a Navy thing?" "It's a people thing," he said. "You learn what's useful and you use that." "But it still cost you something." "Still cost me something," he agreed, "even when you won." "Winning's expensive sometimes," he said. "Doesn't mean you don't do it, just means you know what you're spending." She considered this with the gravity she gave to things she was storing. "I think Victoria is going to be different," she said. Not for the first time. She'd set it on the cart and she was saying it again, the way she repeated things that mattered to her until she was sure they'd landed somewhere permanent. "She texted me something," he said. "Last week." He'd been deciding whether to tell her. He'd decided to. Sophie turned from the window. "She's changing some things at her company," he said. "The way her security team operates. Some of the policies about who they treat what way. She sent me a summary. I don't know if it'll stick. I don't know her well enough to know that, but she sent it." "Why did she send it to you?" "I think she wanted a witness," he said. "Someone outside the company who'd know if she followed through." Sophie turned back to the window. She drew for a moment in silence. "That's smart," she said. "Telling someone keeps you honest." "Yeah." "She's going to follow through," Sophie said, with the certainty she reserved for things she'd already filed as settled. "I can tell." He didn't argue with her. He'd been watching people his entire adult life under conditions designed to reveal what they actually were. And he'd developed a decent sense of the ones who meant it versus the ones who were performing meaning it, and he wasn't ready to say definitively which one Victoria Ashford was. But he thought about the text. The way it had been phrased. The specificity of it. The absence of self-congratulation. He thought about Sophie's note. Respect begins when we see the person before the appearance. He didn't know yet what Victoria Ashford had done with that page. He knew she'd taken it. He knew she hadn't put it away on the plane. He supposed he'd find out, the way you find out about most things. Not all at once, but in increments, in what accumulated over time from the direction someone kept choosing to walk. He was good at waiting. Sophie drew the yard for an hour and a half. She drew it the way she drew everything. Drew to the thing underneath the surface, the yard as it felt rather than just as it appeared, the winter light and the bare edges of the fence, and the way the shadow from the garage fell across the dead grass at an angle that was also, in its own way, a kind of light. When she was done, she tore the page out carefully and handed it to him. He looked at it. "For you," she said, "since I gave away the one from the plane." He looked at the drawing for a long time. The yard. The window frame's edge at the corner of the page, which meant she'd included herself in the drawing by including the place where she was sitting. The shadow and the light. "Thank you," he said. She shrugged in the way that meant she didn't need thanks but wasn't going to refuse it. She opened the sketchbook to a new page and looked out the window again. "I want to draw it in the spring," she said, "when things come back." "Things will come back," he said. "I know," she said. "I just want to draw it." He folded the drawing and put it in his shirt pocket, over the left side, which was a choice he made without analyzing it. He'd find somewhere to put it later, somewhere permanent. He'd know the right place when he found it. Outside, the winter afternoon settled into itself, thin and cold and honest, the way winters were before they learned anything about the spring. The yard sat in its own quiet, the same yard it had always been, waiting with the particular patience of things that didn't need to announce themselves to remain what they were. Inside, Sophie Cross drew. Logan Cross made tea he would ruin again. The house around them did what houses do. Held the space, kept out the weather, witnessed what happened inside its walls without judgment or announcement. This is what the days after something look like. Not the movie's version, not the version where surviving a hard thing becomes a story you get to narrate with clean lines and a clear lesson. The real version, where the hard thing is over and the ordinary resumes, and you find out who you are inside the ordinary, which is the only place the answer to that question was ever really available. Logan Cross had never needed to be a story. He needed to be a father and a person, and present for the specific life that was his, not the classified one, not the decorated one, not the one that existed in Carver's gratitude or Victoria Ashford's reckoning or the phone of the man in the gray suit who'd been recording in row 5. His life. This house, this yard, this daughter with a sketchbook who drew the things underneath the surface of the things she saw and handed him the drawings without asking if he wanted them because she already knew. He'd spent 3 years making himself small in the world. Not from weakness, from a particular understanding that the loud version of himself was gone with the service, and the version that remained was quieter and less visible and no less real. He'd thought sometimes that invisible and unimportant were the same thing. He didn't think that anymore. The greatest thing he'd ever done was not in any classified file. It was not the operation that Carver had described to a first-class cabin at 37,000 feet, though that had mattered and cost something and was real. The greatest thing was smaller than that and larger than that at the same time. It was sitting in this chair while his daughter drew the winter yard, and the tea went cold, and the afternoon went the particular gold gray of late winter light, and being so entirely, absolutely there that nothing else was necessary. He was there. That was enough. That had always been enough. In the official flight log of Ashford Continental Flight 441, among the standard entries of altitude and heading and fuel consumption, Captain James Carver wrote one personal notation at the bottom of the page, in his own handwriting, which was small and precise. The greatest warriors are not remembered for the battles they win. They are remembered for the lives they quietly protect. He did not sign it. He did not need to. He knew who he'd written it about, and that man would never read it, and both of those things were exactly right.